Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give you a minute or two to enter the room. Good evening to all of you. If you would like, you can share where you're joining from in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We're also going to be using the chat later for Q&A as well as the Q&A feature, so you can test it out. Good evening, everyone. For those of you just joining us who are able to sign in now, we're going to get started in a minute or two with the session, just letting people log in. I know not everyone's able to log in immediately at 8 p.m. in Japan, I think. I'm based in DC, so it's quite early in the morning for me. Please be kind. And good evening, everyone. I think we're getting up to or close to the number of participants we're expecting today, so I'll get started shortly. But if you're just joining us now, I've asked you to share where you're joining from, which city, which prefecture, in the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. I think you all know the Zoom drill by now, but that is where the chat feature is located, as well as the Q&A feature, which we'll be using during this session. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and formally start our session this evening, if you're joining from Japan, which most of you are. This morning from DC, from where I'm located, quite early, so be kind, as I said already. This is the Microgrant Initiative for American Jets Information Session. It is presented by US JETAA and the US Embassy, Tokyo. Today, when we're asking during the Q&A session, please use the chat feature, as I said, and the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Also, if you didn't hear it when you signed in, which you should have, this session is being recorded. This recording will be on the US JETAA website after this information session. So if you don't catch everything today, don't worry. You can watch it again as much as you want from the US JETAA website later. Great. So moving on, I'd like to take a minute to introduce myself and my fellow presenters today. My name is Danielle Reed. I'm the coordinator at US JETAA. I'm also the founder and CEO of penpal LLC, my own consulting company. I was an ALT on the JET program in Sendai City in Miyagi-ken from 2011 to 2014. And I've been working in the US-Japan relations field for over 10 years. Before I went on JET, I was at the US Embassy, or I was at the Embassy of Japan in DC here. And after that, I've continued to work with various organizations related to US-Japan relations. And now I'd like to turn it over to Bahia to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Bahia Simons Lane. I'm the Executive Director of US JETAA. I was a JET in Gunma Prefecture from 2005 to 2007. So if any Gunma Jets are here, I'd love to see you say hi in the chat. I think all Jets love their prefectures so much. So I have a special place in my heart for Gunma. I have been working with the JET Alumni Network for a long time, both as a volunteer when I was president of the Florida JET Alumni Association for about 5 years, and now through my current work. And I'm really happy to support this program again for what I believe is the fifth or sixth year. So it's always been wonderful having the support from the US Embassy and bringing this opportunity to current Jets.
Thank you so much, Bahia. And now I'd like to introduce or ask our colleagues from the US Embassy Tokyo to introduce themselves, starting with Grace. Would you mind giving a brief self-introduction?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Choi, and as listed here, I am a Foreign Service Officer working and posted here in Tokyo at the US Embassy. It's great to be with you this evening, evening for us, morning for our friends in DC and in the United States. We're really excited to share with you our experiences and to give you just a glimpse into how we'd like to work with, how we at the Embassy would like to work with the US JETAA team. Thanks.
Thanks, Grace. Noyuri, would you like to give your brief introduction?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Noyuri, and I'm working with Grace at the Embassy in Tokyo. I have worked with US JETAA on microgrants for quite some time now, and I'm always impressed with very creative ideas that JETs bring and propose. And I'm very excited to hear your ideas this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noyuri. Yes, we are a small yet mighty team. So now we'll go ahead and present our agenda today. We have about an hour to go over all of these topics. And of course, we want to leave time for Q&A because I'm sure you have a few questions as you're going through this process. Take a brief look at the agenda. We're going to explain what the Microgrant Initiative is, its purpose, goals, what you have to do to be eligible. And we'll also go over a number of projects so you can have some idea of what a successful application looked like in the past. We'll share the timeline, emphasizing the most important dates first. You don't have to memorize the timeline now, it'll be on our website, but we will review it so you have some awareness. We'll review how to apply. Some of you may be in the process right now. Some of you might just be starting or you haven't started yet, which is fine, you still have time. We'll also go over the selection process so that you can know what we are looking for when we are reviewing applications. The acceptance requirements, if you are accepted, what you are obligated to do at that point. And we'll also review supports and resource services that we can provide throughout the course of the Microgrant Initiative program. Okay, moving on, what is the Microgrant Initiative? I think most of you know if you've joined this information session, but just to give a high level overview, it's a small grants program. And by small grants, we mean about $100 to $1,000 in funding. 1,000 being the maximum. This initiative is for American JET participants who are currently working in Japan on the JET program. You can be in any position, ALT, CAR, SEA, and we are funding projects that introduce American culture and English language to students. If you are a teacher, if you're an ALT, to students in your classroom, but also to people in your local community. So your audience can be varied. It's not just students for ALTs. So keep that in mind as well when you're filling out the application. This initiative is funded by US Embassy Tokyo and administered by US JETAA, which is US Japan Exchange and Teaching Program Alumni Association, in case you didn't know. So moving on. The purpose and goals of the program. The main purpose is to promote English language learning and study abroad. There are some key priority areas here that I'm actually going to ask Grace, if you don't mind, going over in a little more detail what we are looking for this Microgrant Initiative. What areas are we focused on? Or no, Yuri, please, jump in anytime. Thank you.
So as you can see here, we believe that a people-to-people exchange is one of the most important parts that we are promoting in Japan. As you are in Japan and you are actually experiencing those people-to-people exchanges, it's very important that you get to meet people in the country and you get to experience the culture. So we would like to promote more Japanese students. In the future, I understand that many of you will be teaching at elementary schools, but in the future, we hope that your students in Japanese schools will consider studying in the United States so that they will get to learn more about the United States. And also, we would like you to promote the very high level, higher education, university levels or more. Especially, I shouldn't say especially, in various fields, but we are also hoping that many girls will be studying in STEM field. That is a very high priority both in Japan and the United States. And in order to do that, as many of you will be participating as JET teachers, it's important that Japanese students are exposed to very conversational English so that they can communicate with the community. So we hope that those are priority areas that we would like you to focus on. But we are, as Danielle mentioned, we are very much open to your creative ideas, and we would also love to see any ideas involving your community and not just students.
Thank you very much, Noyuri, for that more detailed explanation. And yes, we are open to creative ideas and solutions, but do please keep these areas in mind as you're going through the process. Great. And just to quickly also mention sustainability, since it's here on the slide, we are looking for projects that could provide some support to your local communities, not just momentarily, but over time. Those may be a stronger application, just for your awareness, and we'll talk about it a little more later. Okay, being to the next slide, eligibility and obligation. So this is also clearly stated on the website, but because this is funded by US Embassy Tokyo and it's primarily geared towards American or US citizens, you need to be a United States citizen to apply. That is for the main applicant. You also must be a current JET participant on the JET program, which I believe all of you attending today are. Any position can apply, as I said before, an ALT, a CIR, those rare SEAs. If any of you are here, let me know in the chat. Love to say hi. And this part is actually very, very important. While the main applicant has to be a United States citizen, co-applicants and collaborators do not have to be US citizens, and they do not have to be JETs. They could be members of your community, people that you're working with. So just keep that in mind, that while the main applicant has to be US citizen, co-applicants and collaborators do not have to be US citizens, and they can be non-JETs. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A later. You must also be able to carry out your proposed project. We all have some lofty ideas, things that we would love to see happen, and sometimes they're just not practical. So we are looking for a project that you can actually carry out in the timeline that you suggest with the resources that you have. This is a small grant between $100 and $1,000. So just think realistically about what you can achieve with that amount of funding, with a limited amount of time, with the resources that you have, with the applicants, the co-applicants that you have. Just be mindful of that.
Danielle, can I add something here? Yeah,
please.
The other thing to keep in mind with carrying out your proposed project also is if you're doing it, for example, at your school, and I think we'll touch on this later, your school has to agree that you're allowed to do that project. And so it can be very helpful to speak with your contracting organization before applying. And I know it's a little bit tricky because some of you are new JETs here in quarantine. So, I encourage you to apply anyway, and we can also guide you on whether we think it will be a challenging project to accomplish or not. But definitely, if possible, talk to your contracting organization first to ensure that your project is possible, or whoever you're collaborating with.
Yes, absolutely. And we will emphasize that again later in case you're sleeping, which I doubt you are because it's 8 p.m. But wanted to also just say, well, I'll just move on and we'll talk about it later. You must also submit an interim and final report by the specified deadlines. We'll go over the timeline, but the deadlines can vary depending on your proposed project timeline. And US JETAA, we, as Bahia said, we can help guide you in this process. So at any time, if there's, if you have a question about it or what qualifies or what deadline means for your project, we'll share our contact information later. So you can always ask us. We are a resource here for you. Okay, microgrant projects. I think this is one of the things that a lot of you have joined to learn more about. What are some of the successful past projects? What do they look like? And kind of to learn a little bit more about what's already been done. And to go over this, I'm actually going to ask Bahia to share some of your favorite past projects, what they look like, and what made them very strong applications.
Sure. So, there's been a lot of really interesting projects over the years. And, we've been able to approve a lot of them, though, of course, not all of them. And frankly, I would say that, all the applications we pretty much get are good. And so sometimes it's very hard to make that decision about who we can fund and who we can't fund. But some of the favorites, one current JET did a project, Black History Month Festival, which consisted of several different community events, a movie screening, I think it involved, food and different tables set up so you could learn about, American and Black history and culture in the United States. And he had, more than 1,000 members of the community join and attend the event. So it had a good impact because it was bringing something to Japan that is not something that, people are normally exposed to. So I thought that was a really interesting project. There have been a lot of penpal projects, which I noticed we got a question about in the Q&A. Penpal is very, very popular. We like penpal projects because they impact both students in the United States and students in Japan. And it's an experience for your students to experience English as a communication tool, as a living and breathing thing. Projects that would, in terms of penpal projects that would impact, more students or more community members is, preferred, as opposed to, only 5 students, for example, participating in a project like that. Some other interesting projects are like cooking classes for the community hosted in English in partnership with, for example, international community organizations. That was quite interesting. And the picture here is I believe this was a library project, but it also involved story time and reading time. So it combined creating a physical resource with the students being able to interact with English in a different way, in an interactive and an interactive way. Let's see what else. Some other projects that we funded in the past are, for example, if there's an international festival in the community, we funded a booth with activities for children in that community as well. And yeah, those are all the ones that come to mind. Again, apologize, it's 7 in the morning and I've only had 1 cup of coffee, so I feel like I'm not quite at the top of my game. You can read, though, about our past projects on the website. And the other thing I would say too is that we did have a lot of projects in the past year impacted by COVID. And so some participants had planned to do events that involved physically being in the space with a lot of people. And in many of those cases, we worked with them so that they could modify their project to, for example, be in an online format or change to something that was a physical resource, for example, creating a library in their schools when that was not the original plan. So since you're going in knowing about COVID, I do encourage you to think about the implications of COVID in your planning. But if you end up encountering issues later on, we will certainly work with you to support you.
Great, thank you so much, Bahia. Just want to emphasize again that you can read about past projects on the website if you really want to learn a little more about them and what people have done. Right, moving on to the timeline. The microgrant timeline, the most important date on this page for you to remember right now is that applications are due by November 15th. And applications are due by the end of the day, November 15th at 11:59 p.m. JST, so Japan time. So just bear that in mind. You do not have to run screaming away from the deadline. It's very clearly here. You still have time to do the application. Grantees will be selected and announced around mid-January next year, 2022. Funding dispersals, so any of the funding that is requested for successful grantees would begin in February 2022. And February 1st is the official first day of the project timeline. You have a 1-year period from February 1st, 2022 through February 28th, 2023 to complete your project. That does not mean that your project must be a full year. Project timelines vary. Your project could take place over a month or a couple of months. So this is why on the actual application, we ask for your project timeline because we want to specifically know how long your you estimate your project will take. And when your project ends, the timeline that you list on your application is what we use for the reporting requirements. So these next 2 points, final reports, like the full report about your entire project, is due 30 days after the completion of your project, which may not be February 28th, 2023. So just bear that in mind. We will follow up with successful grantees about when these reports are due. You will receive a lot of information about it. We also have 2 timelines for interim reports based on your specific project timeline that you list in your application. So the first interim report due date for successful grantees would be April 12th, 2022. And the second interim report due date is September 1st, 2022. This does not mean that you have to write 2 interim reports. This means that some projects may start on a timeline where it makes sense to submit an interim report in April, and some where it makes sense to submit an interim report in September. But every project will submit a final report. So please make note of this, think about it. You don't have to memorize this now. Once again, most important thing, applications due by November 15th, 11:59 p.m. JST. So that's what you need to keep in mind right now. And this information should also be on the website, so you can reference it as needed. How to apply. Some of you are probably in the middle of this process. Maybe some of you haven't really started it yet. So we'll just go through it at a pretty high level and focus on some of the things that make a really strong application. As I've said already, every component of the application must be received by US JETAA, so submitted on the website by November 15th, 11:59 p.m. We also, Bahia mentioned this earlier when she was talking about projects. We recommend that you discuss your project with any of your stakeholders. So anybody in your community, or at your organization, at your school, who might be impacted by your project, you really want to get their buy-in on this project. That helps make a successful project. Especially, as Bahia said, if you're a new JET, new ALT, new CIR, getting to know the people that you may be wanting to help in this project can be so useful to you at the beginning. You don't want to submit a project and then have to convince everyone that it's a good idea after the fact. You need that before you submit the application. Also, feel free to check out the FAQ on our website if you have any questions. We've collected a lot of useful information there over the years. I think Bahia will probably drop the link in the chat so that you can access it as well. Filling out the online application, the link is here. We'll also put this in the chat for your convenience, but the application is on our website under the Microgrant Initiative program. Key components, some very basic ones: contact information, your JET information, where you are in the JET program, things like that. We've talked about co-applicants and collaborators a little bit already. Project description and title. Clearly, we have to know what your project is at a high level, sort of your elevator pitch, your like 2 to 3 minute explanation, or I guess, sorry, let's try that again. 30-second to 1 minute explanation of your project is what we mean by project description. And we do ask that you title your project. If you do go to look at the website and review past projects, those titles and those descriptions are what was submitted by the applicant. So that's one way it'll be used by us. So take a little time and think about it. Who's your audience? Some of you are ALTs in schools. Your audience might be elementary school students. It might be junior high school students. Or maybe your audience is broader than that. Maybe it's also members of the community. So we want to know who you're targeting with your project. So I'm going to come back to potential impact. You can see it's bolded here because I think it's probably one of the most important aspects of your application. And as Bahia said, almost all the applications we receive are pretty good. So when we're determining which ones to fund, it often comes down to this impact piece. So I want to talk about it a little more. We reviewed the project dates. The timeline is visible for everyone. The proposed grant amount, 100 to 1,000. Some of you noted in the chat that's changed slightly from previous years, and it might be different on our website, but this is the most up-to-date information. It is 100 to 1,000 this year. And a project budget as well is very important. We can provide some more information later on how you should do the budget if you have questions. There's an outline on the application, I know, some examples, but it's pretty high. It's line items such as if you're doing a library, how much does it cost to buy the books? Things like that for your project budget. Now, impact, I wanted to come back to. Impact can be qualitative. It can be quantitative. It's hard to write about impact, I think, sometimes. You really want to think about all of the potential impacts that your project could have. For example, Bahia mentioned a Black Lives Matter project from last year. That project might have been the first time members of the community learned about issues affecting Black Americans and Brown Americans. It might be the first time they're learning about that ever. It's really hard to quantify that impact. But if you write about the potential impact that could have in your community, that could be a stronger application. Same with the penpal exchanges that are popular. Note that it's mutual exchange, that it's not only the students in Japan who are benefiting from this, but also students in America. And that will show that you have clearly thought about the impact of your project. It may feel like this should be assumed, but we really want to see it written out. And so that we can tell that you're aware of the impacts that your project could have in the community. And of course, something like a library, that can be a permanent resource for a community. It has slightly more quantitative impact. You can say you've developed a library that then students would have access to for years to come. But just mention that as well. And I want to make sure, because this piece is so important, that I'm highlighting it enough. Bahia, do you have anything else to add to this impact piece, or just to provide an example of some really impactful project?
Well, I mean, so I think you've really covered it pretty well. Impact is really a key part that we're going to be looking for. And when we're selecting projects that we're going to fund, we will be funding the projects that are going to have the greatest impact. In terms of, for example, something like a penpal project, one particular one that I just thought of that that we really liked in past years was between a school in Japan and a school in the US, where the students in the US were primarily Spanish speakers. And so it had the impact of improving English language for both the American students and the Japanese students. And that was a unique take on the penpal project that we haven't really seen. And so think about what makes your project kind of unique. I mean, it doesn't have to be unique for us to fund it, but we always like to see unique and interesting projects. And then think about who are the people who are being impacted by it? How many people are being impacted by it? And then what is the kind of deeper impact of what you're doing?
Great, thank you for highlighting those things. I think those are great concrete examples for people to think about. Okay, the selection process. I'm sure you may have some questions about this, but it's really what we just said. It's how well you fulfill the brief. Is your application complete? There's a basic one. Since you all got into JET, I know you're very aware of how important that is. A lot of elements there to consider. But we'll be reviewing, and by we, I mean US JETAA will be reviewing your applications. The US Embassy in Tokyo will also see a list of the applications to select the finalists or the people who are awarded a grant. And we'll be looking at the mission impact, in case I haven't said it enough, and feasibility of your project. Once again, it has to be a project that we can see, or we believe you can accomplish based on the information that you provide to us, based on your budget and your timeline. So we will be looking at feasibility. And your project is going to be evaluated also on the purpose and goals of the program that we reviewed earlier and that Noyuri highlighted. Does it promote English language education? And also think about, this isn't essential, but think about STEM, women in STEM, that was one of them. Does it encourage future travel and study in the United States? That's a big one, I think. And does it introduce American culture to communities and schools within Japan? Maybe especially aspects of American culture that people are previously unfamiliar with. So just think about those things once again, and that's how we're going to be evaluating applications. Great. Acceptance requirements. So if you are accepted as a grantee, we just wanted to give a high level what you'd have to do. You must sign and agree to the terms and conditions of the grant. So if you're accepted, you'll get some documentation, terms and conditions, which basically will ask if you can fulfill the grant to receive the money. Grantees must record and maintain financial records. So you're already submitting a budget for your application. If you are a successful grantee, we'll provide more information on how to maintain financial records, what we need for your reporting requirements. So these would be submitted in your interim and your final reports. And of course, please contact US JETAA with any project changes that occur after the deadline. I mean, Bahia mentioned this, you're all living it right now. COVID-19 can have an impact on how a project can be implemented. So we wanna know about that. If you have a project change, it doesn't mean that it's over, the project is ended. We really wanna work with you on completing that project. And we can be flexible in supporting changes as well, especially changes that are completely beyond your control, or even changes just maybe there's something in the community that's affected the timeline, something has happened, something like that. We just need to know about it, and we're happy to work with you on how to still fulfill your project. Because if you're an accepted grantee, we believe in your project and we would like it to happen. So yeah, we're flexible on how to work with you through changes in the environment, or maybe changes in scope, depending on what the actual situation is like when you're implementing your project. Support and resources. So we, as I've said already, at US JETAA are available for advice, questions. We have resource guides. There's a Facebook group as well that I think Bahia will put a link to in the chat that you can join, of our Microgrant Initiative grantees. US Embassy Tokyo can also be a resource. Actually, I'll ask Grace or Noyuri if you don't mind going over the resources and support that US Embassy Tokyo recommends. I mean, there's the links here, of course, that you can follow, but of just what other options? Sure. Oh, thank you, Noyuri.
So we have Education USA is State Department network that promotes, that offer resources for Japanese students interested in studying in the United States. So all the JETs can also have access to this website, or if you Google or search Education USA, the State Department website also has all sets of information materials that you can use in English. But if you click on this link, or we can send you the link, but here maybe you can send the link in the chat box. This website offers all the information in Japanese. So that would be probably very handy for you and for your students. On the US Embassy website, we have American View, which is an online official US Embassy magazine, where we publish a lot of articles in both English and Japanese. So you can use those materials for your programs if you wish. Grace, would you like to add anything?
Sure, thanks, Noridi-san. I think some other ones that we might want to encourage people to look at. So the State Department also has an American English site with a bunch of different resources. I apologize if this has already been mentioned, but perhaps that's something that can also be something that's useful for all of you, perhaps whether it's in the classroom and not. And then of course, you can always reach out to us for other resources that are available. Hopefully we'll be able to provide some either teaching materials or put you in touch with others who might be able to answer questions or serve as resources for you as well.
Great, thank you both so much. So yeah, well, I think Bahia's already put a lot of links in the chat. Just make sure you copy paste them so that you have them when we close this webinar, because they can be quite helpful to you. So I think that brings us to our last slide. Now it is time for Q&A. I think a lot of you have already started asking questions, which is great, because we can move on to answering them live. Of course, I want to thank all of you for attending. And if you do have additional questions, type them into the chat or Q&A feature. Here's our contact information. Once again, I'm Danielle. You can contact me at contact@usjetaa.org. Pretty easy to remember. I do respond to this email address, so please feel free to send any questions my way. You can also send questions directly to Bahia at director@usjetaa.org. I think Bahia dropped the link to the Facebook group already, but here it is again. And also, if you haven't already, please consider joining US JETAA. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And move on to the Q&A. And I think that Bahia, you've already listed some to answer live. So I wanted to send it over to you to do that.
Yeah, we've had a few questions come in that I wanted to answer that we haven't gotten to yet. I mean, one question that we had in the chat was about if you have multiple schools, and you can certainly apply for projects that involve multiple schools. For example, let's say you're at 4 elementary schools and you want to create an English library in each of those 4 schools. That could, for example, be an application that you would submit. Or for example, let's say you wanted to hold an English camp or an English day for participants from all of your schools. That also would be another possibility. Obviously, as you involve multiple schools, the complexity involved in the project does increase. And the number of individuals that you'd need to get kind of buy-in from also increases. So it kind of depends on your situation. If there are multiple schools under the same Board of Education, for example, it could be easy to work with someone at the Board of Education to do a project that involves people from multiple schools. But that certainly is a possibility. A few others that came in, if you apply 1 year and receive a grant, can you apply in a subsequent year? Yes, absolutely. We have had many people apply multiple times. You also are allowed to apply for the same project if your project is awarded 1 year and you apply it for the second year. However, there's no guarantee that we can fund a project every year. So you do have to reapply for that project, and it may depend on the amount of funding that is available and how competitive the application pool is that year. So in terms of sustainability, which is one of our key, one of the important points, is we do encourage you to think about whether there are alternative ways you could fund the project to make sure that it can continue in the future. But you certainly are welcome to apply. Please do apply multiple years in a row, and many people have. We've also had people who have applied for completely different projects every year, and we've been able to award different projects to the same JET multiple times. I think there was one more question. Oh yes, about new applications accepted each year, and if so, is the timeline the same? So typically, applications open in the fall, and then funding goes out in the new year. This is so that we can accommodate JETs who are new JETs. And in normal years, like non-COVID times, the application has been much earlier because right now the JETs who are new JETs are going they're going in staggered waves due to the COVID situation. And so we did push back the deadline. Another thing we did due to COVID is we've extended the period that your projects can take place during. In past years, there was a short, the deadline for when all of the projects had to be completed was much sooner. And because of COVID and the amount of uncertainty, we have extended that as well. And so I'm not sure yet how that will be impacted in future years when hopefully COVID is no longer a problem. Another thing we've been experimenting with too is making it so that you could do a project that starts at the beginning of the Japanese school year and extends for a full Japanese school year, because we know that JETs come in the summer at kind of an awkward time. There is a survey that we send out at the end because we want we take feedback from what works well, and we incorporate that each year into the application cycle and adjustment. Let's see. All right, we got a few more questions in the chat. We understand the project is supposed to be documented or celebrated, and this info is shared with US JETAA. We'd like to be able to articulate, communicate the extent, scope / intention of this sharing with our schools' JTEs. Can you elaborate on this a bit more? So I think what you're asking is, I guess, about sharing information about the projects once the projects have been completed or are ongoing. We do believe that one aspect of impact is, for example, if you are you create an event and you get news coverage or someone writes a blog post about it, that means that that project that you have done is reaching a greater number of people. And then in terms of our own kind of reporting requirements to the US Embassy Tokyo is, for due diligence, we have to make sure the funds are being expended as they have said they would be. And so essentially seeing pictures from a project and reporting in detail about what you did through the course of your project and how successful it was is part of that due diligence and reporting requirement that we have internally, and we have also to our funders, the US Embassy Tokyo, to make sure that it's being used in the manner that we have awarded it to you for.
Bahia, can I just add really quickly about explaining the intention of this with your JTE as well? We have Japanese language resources on the US JETAA website that you can use if you haven't talked to your JTE yet or members of the community and you'd prefer to give them some information in Japanese that they can read about this program. We do have those resources for you. So please feel free to use them. Yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yes, great point, Danielle. And we actually only added these resources in the past 2 years because we realized that sometimes it is really challenging to explain to a JTE or your Board of Education or somebody, what is this grant thing all about? Somebody wants to give you free money. That seems, strange. Maybe they haven't heard of US JETAA. A lot of times I think it can be helpful in facilitating the communication to play up the angle that this funding is coming from the US Embassy in Tokyo, because I think that's something that your contracting organization or your community will be able to kind of grasp a little bit better than a National Alumni Association that's a nonprofit. So that can be helpful as well. And then Matt had another question about whether funds can be used for honorariums for guest speaker appearances. Yes, absolutely. We have had, there's one project that was a few years ago that was like some kind of seminar on, I can't remember what it was on, but they brought in speakers who were researchers from a university to present in the community on something related to one of our project goals. So that certainly is possible. Yeah. I don't know if there are any other questions, or Danielle, we got a few questions in advance. Did we answer all of those?
I made a point to kind of emphasize them as we went through, but just to make sure that we have clearly answered them, we received a question about what were the most successful microgrant programs and why. I'll just kind of give you an overview of all the questions we received. A library project question. This is about working at 2 different schools. Can a microgrant be split across 2 schools, which I think you touched upon already, or does the project need to be dedicated to 1 school?
Oh yes, actually Danielle, thank you so much. One of the questions was, if you are doing projects at 2 different schools, do you have to submit 2 different applications? And the answer is no, as long as it's like the same kind of umbrella project, right? So let's say it's creating a library resource or a cooking class, and part of that is that you want to do 1 session at 1 school and another session at another school. That can all be part of the same application. You do not need to apply more than once.
Yes, and then a question about just what makes a strong application from someone who's curious about how to do that, who might not have had a successful application in the past.
Yeah, well, I think we covered that, but
Mhm.
basically focusing on impact, number of individuals. I think another thing too that we look at in terms of funding is it's easier to approve funding for things that maybe you couldn't get in other ways. You know, for example, like if you need a physical item that you have to purchase to use, depending on what that item was, like you have to have a really good justification for that. So yes. Okay, we got another question that came in, which I really want to answer, which is about whether it would be realistic to apply to someone leaving quarantine next week when they likely won't meet their JTEs till later in the week. So I've talked actually to the JET coordinators about that. And what I encourage you to do is to apply. And depending on the number of applicants we get who are kind of in that, and tell us in the application that you're a new JET, you're just leaving quarantine, like depending on how many applications we get from people who are in that situation, we will decide the best way to, you know, handle that. It could be that we will add a separate application a little bit later for people who are in that situation, or it could be that we will request additional information from you, you know, at the start of the new year, or something like that. We're not really sure how much interest there is among JETs who are in your situation like that. So it's really good to hear this and to know so that we can kind of address that. So I do encourage you, go ahead and apply, and we will do our best to support new JETs who are in that situation for this project. Well, I think we answered all the questions. So unless there are any additional questions, then we can probably wrap up. But also for those of you listening, if you have follow-up questions or very specific questions like about your exact application, like I want to do specifically XYZ, you know, have other people done it, etc., please send us an email and we can respond to that. And then additionally, on the Microgrant program page, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there are links to past projects, and it can be helpful to read through those to get a little bit of sense of what has happened in the past. Now, I will say we only just closed out our grant for 2019 because we had to extend it due to COVID. And so a full report has not been posted about those projects, but there is an interim report, interim summary that we have shared for that. So COVID definitely upended a lot. We're very, you know, with everything. So we understand that situation. And I think those of you who are on this call have the advantage of at least knowing what the situation is in terms of COVID, which our 2019 grantees did not. Anything else, Danielle?
No, I think that's everything. I was just checking the chat and the Q&A one more time, but we don't have any last minute questions that are coming in. So I think that we are good to go ahead and end this information session. Once again, it will be made available on the US JETAA website. Contact at usjetaa.org. That's me if you have any questions. And it was a pleasure to be able to provide this information session today. I'm just really thrilled that so many people are excited and interested in this on the JET program. I think it's great. I wish this was in existence when I was on the JET program.
Me too. Thank you so much, Danielle. And yes, to the person who just asked whether we could send out a copy of the chat, we can definitely do that. It'll be as a text file, but then you should easily be able to copy paste the links and paste them into your browser. All right. Thank you all. And thank you so much to Grace and Noyuri for being with us tonight. Really appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.